welcome to the History of Philosophy in China by Peter Adamson and Karen Lai, brought to you with the support of the Philosophy Department at King's College London and the LMU in Munich, online at historyofphilosophy.net. Today's episode, Flexing Your Moral Muscles, Xunzi on Moral Cultivation. If Xunzi is optimistic about the capacities of the human heart-mind for moral goodness, and Yang Zu is worried that involvement in political affairs might impact negatively on one's natural capacities, Xunzi is wary of letting people follow their heart's desires. Xunzi, who lived sometime between the 4th and 3rd centuries BCE, was the most remarkable thinker of the three major warring states Confucians. Confucian, revered as the founder of the tradition, has prominence of place, of course, but the text associated with Xunzi, which bears his name, has an eye for detail and diligently works through how a Confucian plan might work. The text scrutinizes popular beliefs, such as superstition, carefully examines the resources available for cultivation, and considers what humans are able to achieve through actively developing their capacities. The Xunzi is impressive, not least because in stating its point, it demonstrates close familiarity with the ideas and discourses of the Warring States period. Unlike the Analects and the Mengzi, which are comprised mostly of dialogues, the Xunzi is organized more like a set of essays, 32 in total, though quite a few of them do not stay on point, and there are overlaps in topics across the chapters. In some ways, this is unavoidable, with sweeping chapter titles such as The Rule of a True King, Enriching the State, and The True King and the Hegemon. The more important reason for the overlaps, though, is that the Xunzi is a compilation of texts, and it's quite possible that the chapters themselves are compilations of shorter texts. They were first compiled by Lu Qiang, a thinker of the Han period, who noted that he brought together the Xunzi by compiling 322 sections of text. These sections would have represented various debates from the later Warring States period. Still, we'll go ahead and, for convenience, refer to the person Xunzi as if the text expresses his ideas. Although the Xunzi is a text rich in detail and rigorous to a greater extent than the Mengzi, never mind the Analects, interest in Xunzi's ideas waned for a significant time after having been influential in the Han period. This was due to the criticisms raised in the 8th century by Han Yu, which challenged Xunzi's representation of Confucian thought as impure. Criticisms of Xunzi continued in the hands of the Neo-Confucians in the Song and Ming dynasties. Wen Shi, a major Neo-Confucian thinker, compiled the 4 books, establishing them as canonical Confucian texts. The Analects and Mengzi were included, but the Xunzi was omitted. Over time, there was much scholarly debate on whether Xunzi was a true blue Confucian, so to speak. Although the Xunzi, no less than the Mengzi, amplified the place of Confucian, some of its sections were sharply critical of the views and practices of others, including other Confucians. The author or authors of the chapter 12 Masters interrogates the views of 12 thinkers, Mengzi included. Its most famous criticism of Mengzi is found in another chapter entitled Human Nature is Bad, which does what it says on the label. Xunzi refutes Mengzi's assertion that human nature is good, and this for a number of reasons. For one thing, this optimistic assertion simply does not stand up to empirical evidence. Does Mengzi really think that people's nature is originally correct, ordered, peaceful, and controlled? Rather sharply, Xunzi also says of Mengzi, he sits and propounds that human nature is good, but when he stands up, then he cannot implement it, and when he unfolds it, then he cannot put it into practice. Is his error not great indeed? Xunzi has a more significant concern with Mengzi's views, though. If human nature is good, what place is there for effort in developing our moral capacities? Perhaps Xunzi oversimplifies Mengzi's views on further developing our moral natures. We might have our own views about the state of human nature, whether it is originally good or bad or neither. Mengzi himself suggests that some people hold the view that some humans are born naturally good and others naturally bad. Scholars have debated what exactly is at stake in Mengzi's and Xunzi's disagreement about human nature, focusing on the various components of their broader arguments, such as their respective conceptions of heart-mind or the nature of morality. Some even suggest that they are arguing at cross purposes. These issues are not unimportant, but the focus on the differences between their views sometimes overshadows important features of Xunzi's philosophy. One reason for Xunzi's rejection of Mengzi's claim about human nature is that it is given, it is what heaven has given to humanity, and it cannot be modified, even if that was to be for the better. To put it simply, Xunzi would say of human nature, it is what it is. The difference between their views is not merely that one sees our natural moral constitution as good and the other as bad, but in fact that they disagree about what it is. In the next episode, we'll return to this disagreement, placing it in the broader context of how their contemporaries, including Xunzi, debated humanity's moral nature. Xunzi was emphatic that something needed to be done about the way people understood their goals in life, how they treated others, and how they viewed society. If we lived in the Warring States period, we would most probably have felt, like Xunzi, that if life was going to be tolerable, not to mention satisfying, some sweeping changes needed to be made. Many texts of the Warring States period reflect an awareness of the urgency of this issue. Distinctive to the Confucian response to this challenge is the conviction that we can grow our moral lives by shaping our heart-minds in a society led by a ruler with a moral vision. Xunzi was no exception. For him, individuals needed to work hard at cultivating their moral sensibilities so that they can correctly prioritize what is morally significant. Simply going along with our compassion for others was neither reliable nor sufficient for bringing order to the world. Proper deference to others must be inculcated through the exercise of ritual propriety and rightness. How we act must be brought into alignment with these moral resources, as they are not found in human nature. Xunzi highlights the rift between our natures and these tools for moral change, arguing that, if one follows along with one's inborn dispositions and nature, then one will not defer and give way. If one defers and gives way, then one is at odds with one's inborn dispositions and nature. He uses the imagery of crooked wood to express the original morally flawed condition of human nature, saying, "Crooked wood must await steaming and straightening on the shaping frame, and only then does it become straight." This sounds extremely harsh, which may have contributed to the Neo-Confucian marginalization of Xunzi's philosophy. Though we should not lose sight of what Xunzi was seeking to emphasize, that shaping our moral natures is effortful, not least because it goes against the grain of our nature. Deliberate effort, wei, is what we need. It is the conscious decision we make to attend to our moral development. Xunzi distinguishes effort, wei, from human nature, xing, showing how they pull in different directions. Those things in people which cannot be learned and cannot be worked at are called their nature. Those things in people which they become capable of through learning and which they achieve through working at them are called their deliberate efforts. This is the division between nature and deliberate effort. Chris Fraser, a scholar of Xunzi's philosophy, contrasts these two words in terms of Xunzi's focus on the endeavor that is emphasized in the term wei. Wei refers to any activity requiring work, learning, or considered choice, whereas xing refers to what we do by virtue of spontaneous functioning, requiring no work or learning. Xunzi's insistence that people take an active part in their moral development goes hand in hand with his disdain for superstitious beliefs. Having such beliefs hinders our moral cultivation, because our efforts are stymied by false convictions. Xunzi explains that strange and inexplicable events such as eclipses, comets, falling trees, and severe climatic conditions like floods, droughts, and earthquakes, for example, are unconnected with the quality of the country's leadership. Such events are not caused by poor leadership, nor is it the case that they foretell what is to come. Xunzi says emphatically, "The falling of stars and the groaning of trees are simply rarely occurring things among the changes in heaven and earth and the transformations of yin and yang. To marvel at them is permissible, but to fear them is wrong." Xunzi here diagnoses the cause of such events and tells us how to react to them. There is nothing mysterious or mystical going on. The ill omens that should concern humans are those that result from human actions. Xunzi provides an extensive list, including poor plowing that harms the planting, unstable governments losing control over the people, rice being expensive, domestic animals producing monstrous offspring, government policies lacking in timeliness, and fathers and sons being suspicious of one another. These are the circumstances that are worth marveling at and also worth fearing. They need to be fixed. They are caused by humans, and only through deliberate effort that is properly guided can they be turned around. The decoupling of inexplicable weather and climate events from human activities is testament to Xunzi's perspicacity. He presents compelling arguments by systematically getting to the root of the error, so that in our attempts to remedy the circumstances, we're not barking up the wrong tree. The Xunzi also makes a case against physiognomy, the practice of reading people's faces and bodies more generally as a sign of their moral rectitude. Tall or short, beauty or its lack, have no connection with a person's fortune or moral maturity. Xunzi provides examples of tyrants who are good-looking, and quite irreverently, of moral exemplars who are not. The appearance of King Yan of Tsu was such that his eyes were as big as a horse's. Kong Su's appearance was such that his face looked like an ugly mask. The Duke of Zhou's appearance was such that his body looked like a broken tree trunk. Yu hobbled about and Tang leaned on one side. Yao and Shun were cross-eyed. The passage then asks rhetorically whether it is possible to judge their intentions and motivations on this basis, or the quality of their learning. It was rare during the Warring States, and indeed even centuries later during the Han period, not to interpret climatic and weather events as an expression of heaven's approval or disapproval, or as a sign of things to come. Xunzi did not share the widespread belief in awaiting or prophesying signals issued by superhuman agents. For example, Mozi believes that the universally beneficial influence of heaven is the ultimate standard for humankind. Mengzi, for instance, viewed a morally attuned human nature as endowed by heaven, and Xunzi likewise recognizes heaven as the source of human nature, but as we said, he takes it that heaven's work is done in giving to us our nature. This suggests that Xunzi's conception of heaven centers on what naturally exists. This is sometimes described as a naturalistic conception of heaven or tian, more to do with what exists than to imply that there is an agent who actively creates all things and has ongoing oversight over the moral affairs of humans. The Xunzi sets apart heaven's actions from those of humankind, stating that even virtuous kings, such as Yao, or tyrants, such as Jie, do not affect its course. However, Xunzi does not sever the link between humanity and Tian, noting that it is important that human actions align with heaven's course. There is a constancy to the activities of heaven. They do not persist because of Yao, they do not perish because of Jie. If you respond to them with order, then you will have good fortune. If you respond to them with chaos, then you will have misfortune. In this same chapter entitled Discourse on Heaven, Xunzi states that our destiny rests with heaven. Perhaps his attitude to heaven may be characterized as detached reverence, one that takes it upon ourselves to fix the ills in this world, rather than await the ultimate authority of heaven to cast its final vote. The Mengzi, which accords ultimate moral authority to heaven, runs into difficulties when bad things happen to good people. Should we hold heaven responsible for people's suffering over long periods of time? Recent interview guest Franklin Perkins, who considers the place of heaven and the problem of evil in Warring States texts, expresses Mengzi's problem like this. For a cultivated person, not to care about the suffering would violate our heavenly endowed nature. To care would be to struggle against heaven itself. Whereas the Mengzi finds itself in a difficult place, Xunzi holds humans to account. We, the humans, are to blame if things go pear-shaped. Xunzi gives us a wide range of resources to help us along the way. There are standards and models, both of which are expressed with the term fa. This seems potentially confusing, but it made sense for the Confucians, as a model that shows us how to conduct ourselves appropriately is also a standard, the way an artist's anatomical dummy is both a model of the human body and used by the artist to make sure a statue has the right proportions. There are standards of appropriate conduct and rightness, and also of moral goodness, which manifest themselves in many ways, such as in being amenable and deferential and loyal and trustworthy. The most eminent models are the sage kings, who in antiquity developed standards of moral conduct that are indispensable to a flourishing society. It's difficult to work out which came first, the sage kings, who are the models, or the standards which the sage kings had the unique moral insights to develop. To this chicken and egg question, the Xunzi gives few clues. It's a particular puzzle given the fact that humans have bad natures. If this is so, then how did sages come to have these insights? Xunzi doesn't seem to have considered this question about the origin of moral goodness. He was focused on the rationale for moral authority. What's important for him is that sages have established moral standards for posterity, and their lives exemplify how to live up to those standards. A sage leaves tracks for us, showing how he embodies sagely wisdom or joyfully reflects on the Confucian Tao. In this way, sages' lives, or their Taos, are both models and standards for us. Standards are important because they help us calibrate where we stand in relation to the Confucian vision. The idea of seeing whether we measure up is expressed in weighing and measuring metaphors, including the compass and square and the ink line. The Xunzi advocates using these instruments to reflect on our moral lives as they can help us avoid being deceived. The idea that we should calibrate our lives according to standards sounds rather demanding. Certainly we do take on role models, observe their behaviors in comparison to our own, and reflect on how we might come closer to these benchmarks. Still, we would not want to be using this calibration process all the time, or even a lot of the time. We might suffer from an inferiority complex because we do not measure up, or from complacency. Suppose we find we are on a par with the models or even better than them. Fortunately, for Xunzi and for those who try to apply his ideas, the calibration exercise is only part of the much larger picture of what it means to cultivate our moral lives. Unfortunately, there are people to guide learners so that their erroneous self-perceptions, whether of underestimating or overestimating themselves, do not lead them astray. Standards and models themselves are only instruments, and learners need guidance to use them. For this, we need teachers. In Chapter 2, entitled Cultivating Oneself, Xunzi emphasizes that as we go down the path of cultivating ourselves, it is important to have teachers who guide us and correct us when we go wrong. This role can be played by friends, for example, but it is a specific task of the Ru being the group of morally and ritually cultivated officials to which the Confucians saw themselves as belonging. Xunzi expresses a symbiotic relationship between teachers and those who learn from them. The learner responds to the teacher as an echo, and that places responsibility on the teachers to show discipline in their own lives. Superiors are teachers to their subordinates. The way that subordinates harmonize with their superiors is comparable to the way an echo responds to one's sound, or the way a shadow resembles one's form. And so in serving as people's superior, one must not fail to be disciplined. Although this passage seems to relate primarily to superiors and subordinates in a political context, the broader point it makes is that they are accountable as they are teachers of the people. The phrase teacher of the people appears several times in the Xunzi. Xunzi here evokes the Confucian theme of ruling by virtue, which has two aspects. First, those who hold official positions are models, yes, moral models, for the people. Second, they must be sure to live upright lives. Xunzi grants significant authority to the ruler, giving him control over the norms that guide the people. The ruler is responsible for setting standards by ensuring that correct names are used. We have previously mentioned this process of correct naming, 正名. It involves determining the meanings of particular words, such as personal conduct, understanding, knowledge, and ability. The Xunzi has an entire chapter entitled Correct Naming. It outlines how, in the past, the sage kings of antiquity and the later kings diligently undertook this task, only for it to fall by the wayside by Xunzi's time. Strange words have arisen, the names and their corresponding objects are disordered, and the forms of right and wrong are unclear. Xunzi wants to reclaim the undertaking of correct naming, telling the rulers and leaders of his day to be great influencers again. This is how leaders should lead, the Xunzi tells us in a chapter entitled The Way to be a Lord. The Lord is a sundial, the common people are the shadow. If the sundial is straight, then the shadow will be straight. The Lord is a basin, the common people are the water. If the basin is round, then the water will be round. The Lord is a bowl. If the bowl is square, the water will be square. Compared to what we see in the Mengzi, the Xunzi offers a comprehensive program for guiding people's behaviors. This difference aligns with their respective views of human nature. For Mengzi, humans are born with morally good capacities, which just need to be encouraged to develop rightly. For Xunzi, we need to work on humans as if their nature was crooked wood and bend them to fit the frame. This has led some to describe the Xunzi's view of socio-political life as authoritarian. It may sound as though he wants humans to be forced, presumably against their will, into a life that accords with morally upright but unnatural standards. But no less than Mengzi, Xunzi believes that all humans equally have abilities to develop themselves morally, and therefore that each is able, potentially, to attain a morally and ritually excellent life. This is why he puts so much emphasis on making an effort to cultivate oneself. Everyone can do it, especially if they get the right help. Indeed, in the very chapter that argues that human nature is bad, Xunzi states, "In every aspect of human nature, the nature of Yao and Shun was one and the same as that of Ji and robber Ji. The nature of the gentleman is one and the same as that of the petty man." So in spite of the Xunzi's gloomy starting point about human nature, it holds great expectations for humankind. For example, although ritual propriety is concerned with being appropriately respectful and deferent in our interactions with others, the difference it makes in our lives is not merely in our behaviors. By learning how to respect others, we come to respect them, and we should aim high. Xunzi says that learning is precisely learning to be a sage. One does not learn solely as to become a standardless commoner. This statement is not intended to scoff at commoners. It makes a moral rather than a social distinction, advocating the possibility of moral achievement for all who engage in this project. Then, too, we must not lose sight of the Xunzi's rich discussions of human dispositions and desires, as well as the human capacities to reflect, deliberate, make the right distinctions, exercise discretion, and understand. In the next episode, we'll explore these capacities further as we examine debates among Confucians and others about the kinds of beings we are and what we as humans are able to achieve. In its close examination of how our capacities, dispositions, and desires are honed, garnered, and controlled, the Xunzi gives the heart-mind a central role. It is the seat of human moral sensibility. Given that we all have this heart-mind that can be shaped, Xunzi's philosophy is not merely about controlling human conduct, but about engaging people together to orient themselves towards the Confucian vision of a moral life for all. Ritual guides us, and it also gives beauty and form to our expressions. Xunzi eloquently expresses how ritual enhances life. Ritual cuts off what is too long and extends what is too short. It subtracts from what is excessive and adds to what is insufficient. It achieves proper form for love and respect, and it brings to perfection the beauty of carrying out rightness. Thus, fine ornaments and coarse materials, music and weeping, happiness and sorrow, these things are opposites, but ritual makes use of all of them, employing them and alternating them at the appropriate times. And the appropriate time for you to find out more about this demanding but inspiring theory is when we release the next episode of The History of Philosophy in China.